afternoon, everybody, and a very sunny afternoon, as you can see behind my head in Lucknow, UP. So I'm hopeful you're all feeling sunny, bright, and peppy to talk about and listen to men as equal partners in family planning, a really important topic that we're addressing today. I'm Preeti Anand. I am the Project Director of Family Planning at India Health Action Trust, popularly also known as the Uttar Pradesh Technical Support Unit Project in UP. On behalf of the Family Planning, Monitoring, Learning and Evaluation, the FPMLE Consortium, as it's popularly known, I'm pleased to welcome all of you to our third webinar in the series of 8, where we're talking about men as equal partners in family planning, barriers and opportunities. Thank you all. Very encouraging numbers. I see the numbers are still rolling. We have 95 colleagues who are already here. I'm hoping as we progress, we will cross 100 mark. Thank you for joining today to learn and discuss about male engagement in family planning, the barriers, opportunities, and of course, the huge benefits of engaging men when it comes to family planning. We hope to make this webinar an interactive one and welcome questions and comments from all the participants as we progress. You also have the Q&A section and you also have the chat section where you can continue to type your questions as our panelists go ahead with their presentations. The FPMLE Consortium was constituted 8 years ago with a goal to provide grounded evidence on efforts to improve family planning evidence in India, with particular reference to the 2 geographies, which are Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. The consortium led by Population Council brings together technical support units led by India Health Action Trust in Uttar Pradesh, CARE, India Solutions for Sustainable Development in Bihar, the International Center for Research in Women, popularly known as ICRW, and the Center on Gender Equity and Health, GEH, US San Diego, to collectively support the family planning program with data-driven evidence. Today's session will focus on how men play a very critical role in couples' contraceptive choices and decisions. Well, we know they are influencers, they are dominant decision makers and users, but rarely get an opportunity to participate as equal partners. Despite this, FP continues to be perceived as a women's concern and does not really include or address by programs. The men's engagement is not very significantly addressed by programs across the country. We will discuss normative and systemic barriers for men to engage in family planning as equal partners and share potential opportunities and entry points to address this. For the session today, we have 2 very eminent panelists. I'm sure most of you know Pranita, Dr. Pranita and Dr. Abhijit Das. I will still go ahead and give a brief introduction of both. Dr. Pranita Achyut is Director, Research and Programs at ICRW Asia. Pranita brings 20 years of experience in applied research and program monitoring, particularly on gender-based violence, adolescent health, and family planning. Pranita has led many of ICRW's flagship initiatives, including monitoring, learning, and evaluation of Urban Health Initiative, quality of care and family planning, gender equity movements in school, and promoting adolescent engagement, knowledge, and health, PUNK, as it was popularly known, to name a few. Our discussant today is Dr. Abhijit Das, Managing Trustee, Center for Health and Social Justice, and Clinical Associate Professor with the Department of Global Health, University of Washington, USA. Dr. Das is a public health physician with over 30 years of experience in reproductive health, gender, human rights, and health governance related issues. He is a global pioneer in programming on men and masculinities for gender equality. He has many papers in academic and popular publications and has been invited as speakers on various platforms, including the UN and the European Union. He serves as advisor to various research centers and policy-making bodies in India and abroad. In the next 50 minutes, we will have Dr. Pranita present for 20 minutes. That's fine, Pranita. and followed by Dr. Das sharing his views on the presentation and the subject overall for the next 10 minutes. I will try and keep tab of the time, might give you a few indicators here and there. And of course, we will have a Q&A session for the last 15 to 20 minutes. So with that, I think we're really eager to start this very engaging discussion. And once again, we look forward to having a very active participation from all our 111, a lucky number of participants that we have. And I will continue to make note of questions that you put on the chat, and we'll attempt to answer as many as we can in the last session. So with that, Pranita, Dr. Pranita, over to you.
Thank you, Preeti. It's really interesting, and we all are feeling really privileged to be part of this conversation. And it's really my pleasure to be sharing some of the learnings and insights that we have gained from different studies. And I want to specifically mention two studies that from where we have taken most of these insights. One is couple engage study, which ICRW conducted with in partnership with Vihara and support from different FPMLE consortium partners. And the other study, which Population Council led with men in UP as part of the FPMLE initiative, to say. You know, the thing is that men have always been part of family planning. We all really acknowledge and understand that family planning is a shared responsibility. I think the question that, or the area that we are really focusing today is men as equal partner, and what are the barriers and the opportunities that are there. I'll briefly talk about the context, and I'm sure most of the people here are familiar with the family planning context, especially UP and Bihar, and also where men are in that. Then I'll discuss more specifically what are the enablers and barriers, both normative and systemic, and finally, what are the opportunities and a way forward. Moving forward, I mean, when NFHS 5 had come, I think that really brought a smile on everybody's face. India as a whole, we all succeeded in increasing contraceptive prevalence rate, particularly modern method use, from 48% to 56%. But I think another important part was that there's been a shift in method mix with higher contribution from reversible methods. I mean, still female sterilization continued to be the dominant method, but other methods or spacing reversible methods start getting into the method mix with newer method introduction. We saw similar pattern in UP. Here, the increase in modern contraceptive use was much more from the context of increase in the use of condom. On the other hand, in Bihar, we saw that female sterilization continued to be the dominant method. Now, over the years, there is hardly any increase in male sterilization. It continues to be only 0.1%. But we all know men are more than just the user of family planning. They are partner with huge influence. And in this presentation, I'll be focusing mainly on currently married men as partner with critical influence on choices and decisions in family planning. If we really talk about men's knowledge, what we found that awareness of female and male sterilization and condom is almost universal. In fact, large proportion have also heard about pills and injectables. Despite IUCD being around for decades, 50 to 60% men said that they have heard of it. But then again, just hearing about a method is not knowledge we would like to really consider. So the study which Population Council led in 2 districts of UP, what we found that for half of the men, male sterilization is a permanent method. And that's the knowledge that they had. They had no other information. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that they had positive opinion, but they just knew that it's a permanent method. Around a third thought that sterilization would make them incapable of hard work or will make them impotent. So there was fear and concerns. And there were also fears and concerns around female-centric methods. And I would say that, all these were not just myths and misconceptions. So when we talk about fears and concerns, we also have to be very mindful as to what those fears are and how those can be addressed or should be addressed. Around men's perception, if we see that there is a recognition of the need to prevent unwanted pregnancy, acknowledgement of importance of sexual pleasure, but there is also support to men's authority on final say in contraception. There's also the perception that FP is women's issue. And the question is, where are these coming from? So just let's look at the relation between notions of masculinity and FP outcomes. As I was sharing earlier, Population Council led this study in UP, which included a survey with 1,200 men in 2 districts of UP, Aligarh and Fatehpur. And in this, we used 2 indices, one on men's attitude towards equality in gender relations, and another on conformity to masculine behaviors, how much aligned they feel to those behaviors, to create a gender equitable men index, and then use that index to segment men in 3 groups: equitable, rigid, and ambivalent men. What we found in our sample that 30% were equitable, who were less conforming to masculine behavior and less supportive of inequitable gender roles and violence. 33% were rigid, who were conforming to masculine norms and behaviors and supportive of gender roles and use of violence. 37% were ambivalent with contradictory thoughts and behavior, supportive for some while against on other. What we found that equitable men have favorable attitude towards family planning, are more supportive of contraception, even in the context where couples have only daughters. And I think it's important to recognize given strong son preference that exists in our study area and in general in India. High proportion of equitable men reported engaging in spousal communication on whether and when to have children, or even on different contraceptive methods that could be used. Compared to rigid men, equitable men were more likely to decide contraception together and adopt a modern method. Even ambivalent men were more likely to show positive attitude towards family planning and adopt positive behavior compared to rigid men. But I think it's important that while we find this correlation that exists, I think it's important to deconstruct these notions of masculinities to understand their influence better, because that's where probably the opportunities lie. This tired, worried 24-year-old shared his story of being a responsible man when he shared that he got married at 19, started early. He had to be provided for his family. Their first pregnancy was complicated and he had to take loan for the delivery. There was a sense of urgency when he said, I need money to pay off that loan that I had taken from my wife. And his is not a unique case. There are many such men embodying strong notion and role of men as provider and protector, which comes with privileges and control over resources and decisions. But it also puts pressure on them to fulfill a range of social expectations, irrespective of whether they are prepared or equipped to do that. That's what we really found in our study. And while this story is from Bihar, it was also the case in UP. So this strong notion is very much there, and on a daily basis, on everyday basis, men are experiencing and expressing those. And this type of notion often prevents couples from building positive and respectful relationships. We found that little gestures and private moments contribute tremendously in building the relationship, especially in the initial years of marriage. But the context that we are talking about, where many men, both men and women, enter in marriage with little familiarity of each other and lots of assumptions and fears of how to behave, what to talk, how will the other person will react. And so often, instead of exploring and understanding each other, they start fitting themselves in the established gender role, something that they have learned and experienced and seen. During the discussion, the study, we found that both men and women share inhibitions in talking about sex, all the silence and taboo that's associated. But women's inhibition also came from a sense of fear. What will happen if I'll talk? And sex also extend the whole conversation around contraception. So there was a sense of fear, especially among women, to initiate that conversation that was very apparent. We found that men's expression, or especially sexual expression, is also an extension of their overall sense of being provider and protector. In many discussions, men use the expression of control as their ability and strength instead of using contraception. Like I said, as a man, I have to do. If I will not do, who will do? And as a man, I can do. So the whole sense of like controlling on self and controlling on desire was also often expressed instead of talking about pleasure. So there was very little expression and around and articulation around pleasure during the interviews and the discussion. Consent was hardly talked about. I mean, men often assumed implicit consent, and women, sex as a duty and as a responsibility that they talked about, irrespective of whether they are interested or not. Limited spousal communication, pressure to prove fertility, often led to first pregnancy happening soon after marriage. And this pressure was both external from family and friends, but also often internalized by young people, as their primary role after marriage, like, फिर शादी क्यों किया अगर बच्चे नहीं कर रहे? So that was also something that came out often. They also recognized and shared that once the first child is there, then the pressure varies out. So why to really fight and struggle? Better to have child and then see what and how to space the next child. And there was very clear desire for upward mobility. They wanted to be financially secure, provide better life for themselves, but more for their children. And also there was a recognition that there is a cost of parenthood and childcare. And so that was definitely a big, huge opportunity. We see that that can be leveraged or used as an entry point to engage men. And there was definitely a high intention to space after the first birth. Now, when we talk about gender and masculine norms, they also influence the ways in which information is gathered and used within relationships. We found that men were a key source of information on contraceptives for women, and were also gatekeepers, particularly in early phase of marriage. I mean, that doesn't mean that women did not have other sources, but it's about this type of power relation that existed. So even when women had knowledge, she would prefer to wait to see how much and what husband thinks and share before she expresses her own knowledge or sense. And in many conversations, we found that men had this whole understanding and thought that their knowledge and information is superior than and more accurate than women. And that was really adding to the power dynamics and the way they would interact and connect on the issues of like, you know, body changes, sex and reproduction. So, and all these power struggle is happening within the context where both have limited knowledge, but it's about, like, you know, even within that limited knowledge, whose knowledge is more and better than others. Men within their own network usually look up to their friends for information on sex and contraception, and also learns about the expressions and meanings of gender and masculinities. So definitely peer engagement could be a potential space to engage them. And of course, with increasing penetration of smartphone and digital technology, that's definitely a critical tool for engaging them. And we saw that even among migrant population or even men who were there, they were often using phone for multiple purposes. And it could be an important tool to provide comprehensive and accurate information, and can also really help in facilitating spousal communication. You know, gender and masculine norms are often reinforced by the systems. We see the same in health, within health system. I mean, there could be so many examples and detailed discussion on that, but just taking a couple of examples, I would say, like, you know, women constitute major workforce in health sector, with almost 100% frontline workers are women, but very few in leadership positions. So, you know, where the work lies, where the decisions are being made. Frontline workers with huge burden to deliver are often undervalued and underpaid. Then again, coming from the same community, they also carry similar perception and notions. We've seen where frontline workers prefer to reach out to 2+ parity women, both because of the norms that there is a general pressure to have a first child soon after marriage, but also because of the way system look at different methods, the incentives, the compensation associated with specific methods, also in a way force FLWs to prioritize higher parity women for family planning. Men do not feel connected with the health system. Like in the survey, we found only 6% could discuss FP with men. And it's not that men feel this way. Even frontline workers often feel uncomfortable talking to men about family planning. I think but the opportunity that we see is that over 70% men felt that FLW should discuss FP with men along with wife. So there is an interest and willingness for spousal, spousal counseling, and that opportunity seems to be there. And the important is to really leverage those. So just finally summing up, some of the opportunity that could be taken forward. One is that there can be activities around couple making, which could strengthen emotional intimacy, and efforts like Nayi Pehal could be leveraged for this. I think it's about thinking about what could really those activities be, which can be integrated within this Nayi Pehal initiative. Another important part is to link sexual pleasure to positive sexual behavior while delinking pressure of performance per se. And I think this is extremely important to really think and need to position sex from pleasure perspective rather than from the performance and the pressure perspective. We all know gender behavior is nurtured during early adolescence and is critical phase for intervention. School could be an important entry point, but for that, school system also need to recognize and act. That's extremely important and critical. Couples' aspirations for upward mobility and better life for their children provides a very important opportunity that can be leveraged using financial planning as a tool, both using technology and also more interpersonal engagement. And last point, but not the least, is the health system need to really approach family planning with more inclusivity and gender responsive, rather I would say gender transformative, both in policy and program. And one of the important steps could be to make trainings, capacity building more gender transformative and not just the clinical training. So along with critical, it need to be really helping provider understand different aspects of gender and help them understand and analyze gender power relation. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranita. So timely. My alarm just went off and you were on your last point. Thank you so much for a very, very enriching and invigorating presentation. I'll now invite Dr. Abhijit. I think you have a presentation too. So over to you, Dr. Abhijit.
Forgot to unmute myself. Thank you so much. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So thank you so much for that presentation, Pranita, because you clearly laid out the situation as it is today. Let me see if I can move my slides. What's happened? Oops. So what I heard you say was very, very to the point, and I think it's a very useful summary of the current situation, both in terms of what the family planning program status is in terms of contraception, as well as issues around masculinity, and you outlined a set of future possibilities in the current context. And I think there is some good news that we have to celebrate. You've pointed it out. Fertility rates are coming down, contraceptive rates are rising, but female sterilization rates are it's not rising, but its proportion has reduced, but it's still rising. But, and this is a big but, spacing is not increasing. And we know that early marriage, early fertility, quick births, and early termination is the pattern which is being followed in much of India, especially in UP. And this actually increases the birth rates, because as you have 2 children, or in 2 years, it's a faster birth rate than if you have 2 children in 5 years. So spacing is very important, even to reduce the growth rate of population. So that's also a concern for some quarters. So the question then is, if we want to increase spacing, who is the person who desires? And I'm saying this with deliberate intent. Is it the state? Is it the society? Is it the family? Is it the couple? Is it the man? Because at this point in time, men are not in the locus of the people whose decision or whose desire is to reduce or increase spacing. Because as the presentation clearly says, men feel it's a women's issue, it's not their issue, but they would like to have the final say. However, we've seen a possibility also from the presentation about the equitable men. And these equitable men at this point comprise about 30%. And this group actually may have a different opinion. Their participation is better, etc., etc. So the possibility sort of lies among these equitable men. Question is, can we raise the number of equitable men in society? I think that is the problem, or that is where the solution will also come from. Now, let's come back to family planning for a minute. Now, again, in family planning, who is concerned about family planning? Is what is the level at which the concern is, and who is the person concerned? Because what we see, family planning today is a very, very contested, and there are many players. There are the politicians who desire it for certain purposes. It could be natalist, it could be nationalist, it could be controlling certain population groups, etc. The demographers have their own concern, TFR, 2.1, NRR, etc. The economists are talking about things like demographic dividend. Then the program persons who have their program sort of deliverables. And then we have the societal leaders, son preference, women's position, mother-in-law, early fertility, and of course the couple. So the question now is, as we move towards men's equal participation in family planning, where has the locus of control got to be located, and who needs to be the people deeply concerned? So I'm raising these as questions because oftentimes we forget that this is a contested, actually a political field in UP. Now, let's come to the issue of masculinities. And this has been mentioned very much in the presentation. The issues of being provider and protector, and with it, issues of control, power, honor, and virtue. Pleasure and performance, issue of self-importance and power, ability to sire a child, especially a male child, as soon as possible, issues of potency, power, and honor. And so what we find is some of the key concerns about masculinity in UP are issues around power, control, potency, honor, virtue, and me being the self of the universe. Now, the question is, can you bring about male participation, male engagement, without addressing these core concerns? That's a big, big, big question. And if you want to, how do you do so? Now let's come to the issue of family planning and within the family. So it's actually an issue within marriage and family. And here I want to sort of raise a disjunct. Issues have been raised during the presentation, and you can see the disjunct here very clearly, is that there are certain assumptions about marriage, that it is about a couple. It is about intimate companions. It is about conversations, communications, love, intimacy, pleasure, sharing. But what we see in reality in states like UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, quite a long list there, that women are brought in as bahu, wives, simply to carry forward the family line, to be reproducers, breeders, and as unpaid labor. That is the reality. And they are brought in within a situation of widespread gender discrimination within the family, and often a lot of violence. I don't want to quote the violence figures here. Most of you know. And women are inside the house and men are outside the house. So what is happening is these people are in two different spaces. So there is actually very little time or space to create sharing, to create companionship. And sex, when it happens, is mostly coercive. And what the concern is for the family is that it should be reproduction. And men, they have their own concerns about pleasure. So oftentimes pleasure, virtue, etc. means that men are also not into the reproduction bit in a big way, but their sex, pleasure, etc. is not happening the way they want. So the question then is, can we make men equal partners without changing this reality that is the family today? So the list of suggestions that were there at the end of the slide, can it happen? I'm not sort of in any way challenging any of those suggestions, but can it happen without changing these current realities? Because what we are talking about is what is there in the left part of the slide, a relationship which is intimate, which has love, which has pleasure, and which has sharing. So I want to now talk about, is that possible? Somebody wrote a question, is that possible? Yes, it's possible. And we have worked in several states. UP, MP, Maharashtra, we had a deliberate focus on maternal health and family planning. But we've seen this happen even in our work in West Bengal, Jharkhand, and Rajasthan. So context very similar to the context that we are talking about. So we've seen family planning related results, things which are desirable results, increase in contraception, increase in male involvement, consistent use of condoms. And I think this is the most important, delay in the first childbirth after marriage, because that is an imperative in India, that the whole family is looking for the first child. It proves a lot of things. But what I want to draw your attention to is that this cannot happen in isolation. There are a whole set of additional results which will have to take place, because we are talking of creating equitable men. We are not talking of just family planning in isolation. So there is increased participation in maternal care, prenatal period, during childbirth and after childbirth. In social norms being affected at the same time, reduction in early marriage, reduction in GBV reporting, and increased girls' education retention happens at the same time. So this is happening for women in those families. Family level results, men are participating in domestic work. Men are participating in childcare. And I don't want to give the results. There are so many studies which I can refer you to, but the point remains that family planning results are obtained at the same time. So the program cannot be only focused on family planning. The approach has to include the other dimensions of gender equality, other dimensions of masculine anxieties and concerns. And lo and behold, you also get, and this is where women have reported, improved intimacy and love, improved trust, including issues of sexual trust, because men are very sexually concerned that their women should not be talking to other men. There's this constant sense of kya ho raha hai, and better sex. This has been reported by women. These reports are not from men. So what we are talking about is, if we want to increase men's engagement, if we want to bring men as equal partners, we have to keep the couple at the center. And to keep the couple at the center, the focus has to be equitable men. So what our quest is an alternative equitable man, engaged and responsible partner. So there is contraception, there's infection prevention, there's pregnancy, infancy, childcare, everything. There's engaged and supportive householder, participation in domestic chores, caregiving work, caring and empowering father, irrespective of the sex of the child. But all this has to happen with individual and increased self-respect about the person taking care of self-care, substance abuse, issues like that have to be, we have to think about. We have to also talk of building alternate social capital with these equitable men, so that the social norm itself can shift, because the social norm is not created by one man. It has to be a group of such alternative equitable men creating an alternative social capital, and finally active citizens, because it requires a whole set of state services in order to support family planning, as we see. And we've realized that even the functionaries themselves carry their prejudices. So how do men engage as active citizens? And this has to be in the frame of the equitable man that you have described. And the programs have to be conceptualized beyond the narrow margins of family planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abhijit. Very timely. And something that really has given us a lot of food for thought. Of course, I completely agree with you that the number of equitable men has to really and consistently keep going up. Otherwise, we're not going to see the positive change in norms and participation, couple decision making, the equitable, the same respect to their women counterparts, which will lead to better contraceptive uptake happening when the couples agree and decide together. Moving forward, we have quite a few questions that I have been making note of. I would start with the last one that Disha just put up in the chat, because I think it's the easiest for me to see. And Dr. Abhijit, this question is for you, which says, did you also look into men from different age groups and their sense of engagement in contraception and care work, and to what extent did it differ?
So that's the answer. The short answer is all of this work is happening actually with men in the younger reproductive age group. So it's happening 20 to 35, because that's where reproduction is happening. That's where you have small children. And that's where the benefit of an intimate relationship, the man feels most powerful. So actually it gives results very well in that younger age group, because you actually get love from your wife. you get love from your children. And that's a very powerful reinforcement to carry on all the other role changes that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is, if you want the studies, we also got a 20-year sort of summary of our work with men. I can give you the link later on.
Perfect. So I think that answers the AJ Francis Xavier's question, where he immediately typed out, I think, listening to your response, that would it be possible for you to share information on the current government programs where involving men in family planning and enhancing spousal communication has been very strongly taken forward. So I think
so unfortunately, there aren't many government programs. I've been talking to
Yeah.
the family planning department at the ministry in Delhi for 10 years.
Right.
I've given written concept notes.
Absolutely.
When I was there's very little uptake because the government still thinks in silos.
And thinks more about women when it comes to family planning. But yes, I think there was a point in Pranita's presentation which was really interesting, and I made note of that men do want to avoid unwanted pregnancies. So that definitely an unwanted pregnancy piece is something that both the couple, the man and the woman in the relationship want to avoid. And if we have the younger generation, as Dr. Abhijit just mentioned, which is also a solution that Pranita brought out in her last slide, if we have a lot more gender sensitive work that begins to happen with the younger group, the more equitable balance of men in the larger proportion of the society begins to bring in, begins to change, we might begin seeing results much faster. Another question that Dr. Brinda had typed out was that, are there any examples of successful models? Now, Dr. Abhijit, you were talking about quite a few models or programs which have, really significantly brought this in. So I would put this question up to you, and then Pranita, if there are also examples that you know of that could be shared. And I think the reason she asks this is because as part of the TSU, the male engagement piece is a big ask by the government, and there's great interest by the UP government at the moment to really bring this in. And she, being the lead of the technical piece, I think is looking for answers from both our panelists here. So Dr. Abhijit and then Pranita.
So yeah, thank you for that question. Are there models? I think we've been working for 20 years only doing this. So there are many, many experiences. So the papers are there. But what we have done also is synthesize an approach. So I think what we need to discuss is the approach, but that is the scope of another presentation, right? So I don't want to talk about the approach. There is a pedagogy, there is a sequence of events, there is an issue of how do you deal with men, what are the sort of implementational issues that you need to consider, what is the content that you have to deliver, how do you deal with issues of power and privilege in men's training, etc., etc. So there's a whole set of approaches that we have, or let's say an approach with a whole set of components. And if you're interested, you have my email ID, please connect with me, and I'll be more than delighted to share these approaches and the academic papers that go with them.
Yeah, I agree with what Dr. Das has already said. ICIW has also done some review of different programs, and very few programs on family planning engaging men, because I think that's also not the idea. And it's very unlikely a program which starts with family planning and ends with family planning will be able to also transform gender relations.
Absolutely.
So there are some work that has been there, and I will share a link of that review that we had.
Great. So I think Ashita is making note of all the links that she will probably be circulating to everyone who's on the session today. And that looks like a really nice number that we have in terms of the participants here. A few questions, Pranita, that emerged while you were presenting. So I'll bring those questions to your attention. One was, it would be good to know about the questions asked to ascertain attitudes towards family planning when you were doing the male engagement piece. Should we go one by one? Would you respond? Because all the questions are very different from one another.
So we had questions, and it was a long list of statements around family planning. So we had like a full tool with indices and also specific question around attitude. We had a specific question around knowledge, fears that people had. So it was a very comprehensive questionnaire that we all, as part of like FPMLE team, had created for men. And we had used that. So, I mean, if someone is interested, we can definitely share those too. Those are tried and tested, and with we can also add some of our own reflection as to what we felt during the data collection work or did not work. But we have the full tool.
Okay, so we'll be happy to share the tool with all of you so that you can actually see the kind of questions that were asked to ascertain the attitudes. The other question, Parinta, typed by one of the participants was that are the rigid men, as you were categorizing the three groups of men, do they belong to any specific strata like higher age group, etc., or they came from wealthier backgrounds, belong to the more urban conglomerate, etc., So did you see any difference when you were analyzing data?
Yeah, we have done that analysis, and we found that there were certain specific characteristics out of the one we had gathered.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of age group, in terms of education, also yeah, so that was there. We also found some sort of association with caste and religion, but I think when we are looking especially the caste and religion, we also felt that it's really important to understand, like from their context, like the context from where they are coming. People who are men who are marginalized, their expression of masculinity may be different than men who may not be as marginalized. So there is a variation, and it's before saying that men of particular caste are more likely to behave in a certain masculine way, I think it's really also important to recognize that there are differences. There are masculinities that we really, and our tool may not be sensitive enough to capture all those nuances, especially in our quantitative services.
Right. So this question I'd like to open out to both Dr. Abhijit and Pranita, because we have a participant who asked that, do economically independent women have more say in decision making? Has your experience over the years reflected any of that? Or men are men and women are women? How does it work? So Dr. Abhijit and then Pranita, maybe?
Thank you. I think a yes-no answer is not the way to go. I think you have to understand these are not linear relationships. And I refer to the earlier question as well and the question before that. We are trying to find, is this happening? And then we will change this. The point is to understand that central to this issue of autonomy and coercion, even around family planning, is to do with power and privilege. So on one side, you have the ability to exercise power, which is a sort of privilege. And on the other side, you are a compulsion to experience power. And who are the men and who are the women who are in positions to exercise that privilege versus the compulsion? That's what we have to understand. And who has to lose more and who has to gain more. Now, if you look at issues around, let's say, age, younger men gain more. Older men lose more. Upper caste, rich, the so-called white rich privilege, stands to lose more because also they have never faced compulsion. They're always exercising power. Whereas most of our work, and I think most of your work, is with poor men. So whenever I say poor men, actually there is a disadvantage. So they have the experience of disadvantage. You can make them empathize with somebody else's disadvantage. This is something that we have found. That's a methodological issue. How do you do that? The second issue is many of them are underclass men. So they're poor, they may be OBC, they may be Dalit, they may be Muslim. So what happens is that they have an experience of oppression, they have an experience of compulsion, they can empathize with somebody else's experience of compulsion, and they realize that their privileges sometimes leads to somebody else's oppression. So this becomes a key element in them deconstructing the use of power and the deconstructing their own use of power, and also experiencing that when I actually give up power within the domestic space, within my family space, with my spouse or with my children, there is a reciprocation, which is love, which is a fulfillment, which we don't have in the development scenario. So development indicator of love nahi hota hai. So actually in our Madhya Pradesh work, we took spouses to picnics because they were never in a space together. See, women stay in the under and men stay in the outside. Even if there is one TV, men are watching it in their time and women are watching it in their time. So when men and women come together, they are older men and women. So they have greater societal power and privilege, but there is no reproduction happening there. So women are, so my point is, try to understand the society in which you work in terms of the family structure, in terms of the women's autonomy that is there in that family structure, in terms of the space that couples have to interact with each other. What is the possibility of a spousal relationship? And think about your own life. It is not sex happening in a decontextualized manner just to get some semen out of the man. That is not what it is. It has to be a love interaction. It has to be a pleasure interaction. How is that possible? Think of it when you go to the field and think of what could you do in which that sex could become better, in which that relationship could become more fulfilling, in which that intimacy could improve, and then think of the question that is appropriate.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I think very often when we're looking at large scale programs, working with the government, I think the finer nuances of a relationship which are based on love and trust get completely missed out, so absolutely. I could completely agree with you, Dr. Das. Pranita, if you would like to add anything additionally to the question asked.
I would just say that, it's also about to understand the expressions.
Yes.
So sometimes, because, when we are measuring or time, we often look at the expressions. So while power relation or dynamics may continue to be the same, expression may change. And I always remember one thing, one woman had said, she was an SAG member, and somebody asked that, now that you are earning, getting money and you can get loan, how has your life changed? And उसने कहा कि, अब पीठ पे डंडे नहीं टूटते हैं, but बाकी तो सब वैसे ही होता है. So certain form of violence may have changed, but generally life is as bad as it was, or as skewed as it was.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I completely agree. And I think what Abhijit and Pranita answered also responds to somebody who had actually made a comment. I don't know if it was meant to be a question, but had written that couples lack privacy and access to sharing things with each other. And so, things don't get encouraged. And I think absolutely exactly what Dr. Abhijit mentioned. We have 3 minutes left to the session, and Ashita has been sending me a whole bunch of questions. So I know the session's becoming more interesting, but unfortunately we just have 3 minutes to go. So I'm going to now use my discretion to ask a few questions, and apologies upfront to people whose questions may not be answered. But what we will do is we will share these questions with both our panelists, collate a response from them and share it with all of you, because some of the questions are really interesting. So the one that I'm going to put out to the panelists right now is that there was somebody who asked that men's participation, particularly in rural areas, is influenced by societal and family expectations. Yes, not just in rural areas, let me just say in all our lives, right? If the speakers can highlight or share some data on structural changes that led to changes in men's attitude. I just thought that was important because most of the people who've joined the session today are working in the space of public health, and some of that understanding would help us really build that into our program. So Dr. Abhijit and then Pranita.
So one of the things that we have realized is that how do you use the issue of the what we call the the equitable man. So one equitable man can do very little, because one equitable man is faced by many unequitable, or let us say, people who are going to ridicule him because they want to bring him back into the non-equitable stage. So it has to be with a group. Even though you're talking family planning, which is a personal action, men are going to be experimenting with change. So they need a support group that builds that change. So if you have a group of equitable men, then that equitable men can also be, and this is how methodology, it can be done. So then they become champions of the kind of change that they are accepting in their own lives. And when they're becoming champions of change, that champion is happening at the societal level. The championship is happening at the public system level, because each village also has public system represented by the Anganwadi, the ANM, the Panchayat, or etc., etc. So they influence those spaces. So slowly what you have is not one man, but a group of equitable men taking leadership in that social space in a different way, in which they are not accumulating power for themselves, but they are sharing power or creating opportunities for women, for girls, and for themselves. One of the things we can't forget, and we are also dealing with poor men, and there is a huge issue of unemployment, economic crisis in the states that we are talking about. So the question is, when we're talking to men, we have to also address their concerns. We have had a lot of reverse migration in the post-COVID period. So the question is, these masculine concerns have to be dealt with. Do we create spaces where men can share their weaknesses, men can share their doubts? Because most of the time, men are only sharing their bragging. So we have to create opportunities in which men can be vulnerable and not be ridiculed by their peers, because most of the time, if men are being vulnerable, they are ridiculed. So you have to create those sort of a system in the space that you're in the society that you're working with. Could be a village, could be a mohalla, where these things are also happening, and you're not thinking only about condom use badha ki nahi, condom use badha ki nahi. Because if you're going to do condom use badha ki nahi, then men are not going to become equal partners. And unko agar pakad ke khali sterilization kara rahe ho, nahi karna hai. My question is to the men in this group. How many of you play with your children? How many of you have done sterilization? Because if we have not done it ourselves, then how do we have the moral authority to talk to anybody else? How many of your children change your children nappy in your own life? So I think there are many men in this group. We have to start with these experiments ourselves. We have to experience the change, the struggle of the change ourselves. Because every change is a struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. Pranita.
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking about, the way family structures are changing with a lot of migration, nuclear family. And in our study, we have seen the way couples engage, the opportunity, at least the basic opportunity of having a privacy, a space where they can spend some time talking to each other and learning and exploring each other is more in a nuclear family. So I think some of these are bringing certain change in the way couple interact, engage with each other, and some bit of the power relation between them. I mean, the other thing that I want to also say that, equality is not a fixed idea. It's a journey that everyone has to take from where they are and progress towards equality. And so even in the smaller household, like a nuclear family, you'll see certain aspects may be changing. On certain things, they are more equitable. While on certain things, and it could be around children, son preference, the whole idea of having son may still be as it was in any other household. So certain things are changing, but certain things are probably the expression may be changing. We may find more women in earning or employment space, but still the responsibility of household childcare still being there. So some things are changing, but much more is still remaining at the whole point that Dr. Das mentioned about the power relation, who is at the risk of losing and gaining. That's where it is. And some of the work that we have been doing with younger age group in this school setting is about creating that safe space where boys can talk about their pressure, their vulnerability, and what it means to be a boy. So that's definitely very important and critical, even to feel that that space should be there.
Thank you, Pranita.
Can I
think-
just add one thing?
Yes, absolutely, Dr.
You know, the
Das.
family structure is changing, but if power relations don't change, women can
Yeah.
become more vulnerable. Because within a larger family, there may be layers of protective support between the man and the woman. But
Yes.
when it becomes just the man and the woman, the vulnerability of the woman can increase if the
Absolutely.
power has not changed. Please keep this in mind.
Absolutely. So I know there are a multiple of questions we were not able to answer, and we will definitely get back to you on that. So with that, I mean, there was just one last question where somebody had asked that do men need more options like Risub to have more male engagement? So hearing both our speakers, I would say it is a yes and a no. Men's participation is not just from the perspective of men adopting contraceptives. It's them being the enablers, them being the supporters to their women counterpart or to their partners in case they decide to choose a contraceptive, providing that support, providing that enabling environment, and being that really supportive, empathetic, loving partner. And also, I was just running through the list of the participants today. There are more men on the session than there are women. So I'm sure all your program managers there who are on the session today are going back much enriched, back to your programs, back to your districts and the states, and beginning to take this discussion forward with the respective governments and other counterparts that we are working with. Thank you so much, Dr. Das, and thank you so much, Pranita, for the session and for your time today. And I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up and claps flying into the space, which is very interesting. I really don't know how to do that. But Ashita, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the panelists. Thank you to the participants. Thank you for your time. And we look forward to hosting you all again very soon as a part of the FPMLE Consortium webinar series.
Thank you. Thank you. And have a nice day. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.